Look the other way. 4 words that sum up the Commonwealth's entire case. 4 words that sum up the hopes of those who have tried to deceive you.
There is no doubt in his mind, based on all the evidence, that John O'Keefe went inside the house. How is it possible that John's phone traveled after Karen Reed is already gone, if he was truly hit by a car?
And then some very, very odd things start happening.
And that's very important. He's not saying they killed him intentionally, because that would be a stretch. We don't know if it was intentional or not. What we do know is that it happened. Karen leaving those angry voicemails are actually, in my humble opinion, on her side for an acquittal. Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to your favorite show on the internet, Raw Law Unfiltered, with your favorite host, the DUI Guy Plus. Today we are going to be doing something very special. Today we are going to be talking about Alan Jackson's closing argument in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts versus Karen Reed jury trial. Now, some of you who may be just joining us who may not know who Karen Reed is, she's a woman who was accused of hitting her boyfriend with her car, thus killing him, on January 29th, 2022. The jury trial has just concluded in Massachusetts, and the jury hung. The jury could not reach a decision. This just happened a couple of days ago as of the premiere of this video, and it's very unfortunate. The split, we still don't know what it is, if it was 11-1, 10-2, 9-3. It seems to suggest that there's at least 2 people voting the other way based on the way the words that the jurors used when they sent a note back to the judge that they can't decide despite multiple efforts. And they were sent back twice, and they still could not decide because they have, according to them, they had their own personal, closely held convictions that they simply could not set aside. And you can't set aside your own personal convictions when making a decision. You're always going to be privy to those convictions. And so the jurors decided, you know what, we're just going to call it. And the judge, after twice them coming back saying, Judge, we can't decide, and sending them back, the third time the judge said, okay, I'm going to let you all go. They deliberated for about 26 hours, give or take. An hour less than they did in the Kyle Rittenhouse case. And by the way, be on the lookout. I will be doing some Kyle Rittenhouse stuff in this series that I've been making. You guys seem to be liking this kind of content and you're enjoying my commentary, so I'm going to continue to do so. But today we are shifting gears. Like I said, we are shifting gears to talk about Alan Jackson. Alan Jackson is a phenomenal attorney, a class act, a grade A caliber lawyer who has defended the likes of Kevin Spacey, Harvey Weinstein, Karen Reed, as well as many others, celebrities and non-celebrities alike. He's from Los Angeles. I've met him. He's a very, very down-to-earth guy. He's just a guy you can sit down and have lunch with, and he will not make you feel inadequate. I mean, that is the hallmark of a true high-caliber individual. He doesn't make you feel like you are not on his level. To the contrary, he will let you feel welcome. He will let you feel like you have an audience with him, even though he is on a completely other level. But he does, like I said, he doesn't make you feel it. When I went to the Karen Reed trial myself, I got a chance to meet him and David Yannetti. And what you see on the screen, folks, is pretty much how they are in real life. They're just down-to-earth guys, and that is the hallmark of a high-caliber, talented attorney. They don't present themselves as they're part of this ether where you don't belong because you are an average human or whatever. They don't treat you that way. They treat everybody as friends, and some of them even probably as family, because I've been in contact with a few of Karen Reed's relatives and I got a chance to know them a little bit. And they're human beings, just like you and I. And so there's a lot to be said. Without further ado, let's dive in. This is the last day of the trial before the jury began to deliberate that same afternoon. And I bring to you Alan Jackson's closing. But before we get there, we got to do a quick introduction from Judge Bev, and then we're going to be analyzing Jackson's closing right after that. And it's going to be in 2 parts. It's exactly 1 hour long, pursuant to Judge Bev. She limited both the government and the defense to 1 hour during their closing. So we're going to do 30 minutes in this episode and then 30 minutes tomorrow on 4th of July. So without further ado, let's go.
So because of that, you have to put your notebooks away. All right, so if you just put your notebooks away and just listen, and though the closing arguments are not evidence, they're certainly a very important part of the case. And you've all seen how hard the lawyers have worked for this long period of time. And we've all noticed that you've paid great attention throughout the entire trial. I'd ask that you extend your courtesy to the closing arguments. And in Massachusetts, because the Commonwealth has the burden of proof, the Commonwealth goes last. So we will hear now from Mr. Jackson.
Here we go. Mr. Jackson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Your Honor.
If you may remember, David Yannetti did the opening, and I did a series on that, 2 episodes on David Yannetti's opening. This video will probably be in the same playlist as that one, so it's going to be very easy to find. If you remember, David Yannetti had a theme. He said Karen Reed was framed. If you remember that, Karen Reed was framed. Jackson pivots. You will see how Jackson pivots from that theme, and I won't spoil it for you, but see if you can capture the theme in Jackson's closing as he opens his mouth and begins. Listen closely.
Look the other way. Look the other way. 4 words that sum up the Commonwealth's entire case. 4 words that sum up the hopes of those who have tried to deceive you. Conflicts of interest? Doesn't matter. Just look the other way. Magic hairs, magic glass. Look the other way. Late night calls and Google searches, falsified affidavits, inverted videos, and butt dials galore. Just look the other way. That's what they want. That's what they're counting on, but the uncontrovertible fact is you have been lied to in this courtroom. And your job is to make sure you don't ever look the other way.
You see, right out of the gate, Alan Jackson has set the stage. He set the theme. What is the theme? You already guessed it. Look the other way. Don't pay attention to what's right in front of you, the obviousness of the poor evidence that has been presented, the lying, the fabricating, the planting, etc. He doesn't even have to say it. Look the other way. Just convict. It doesn't matter what the facts are. Just go ahead and convict. That's what the government wants. And Alan Jackson is calling them out on it.
Your singular duty is to stare down the evidence and do it unflinchingly and do it unwaveringly. You see, you're the only thing standing between Karen Reed and the tyranny of injustice. It's your job you didn't ask for, probably a job you didn't want. But it's the greatest responsibility we have as citizens here in America. Lest the government stop answering to us and we start answering to the government. And woe betide any one of us who might find ourselves in the crosshairs of a Michael Proctor. Preparing for today, I was reminded of a quote. It's a quote about the truth, and I want to share it with you. It is of great importance to set a resolution never to tell an untruth. There is no vice so mean, so pitiful, so contemptible, and those who permit themselves to tell a lie once find it much easier to do it a second time and a third. This falsehood of the tongue leads to that of the heart, and in time, it depraves all its good dispositions. What does that mean? It means that it's been observed that to tell an untruth, to exaggerate, to make a false claim, it's a cancer. One lie begets another, and it's a malignancy that grows over time. And that, folks, is how a cover-up is born.
Boom. So he finally says the words. This case has been a cover-up. It kind of ties in to David Yannetti's opening. Karen Reed was framed, as I previously alluded to just a few minutes ago. But that is how a cover-up is born. I mean, that's really powerful, because it's hard to believe, if I were a member of this jury with no access to the internet, with no access to information other than what's presented in the courtroom, that so many people would be involved in a scheme of this magnitude. I mean, we have dozens, if not like close to 100 people. Again, I've made this point before and I'll make it again. It's almost like conspiracy theory like. We've been called conspiracy theorists, anybody who's been supporting Karen Reed throughout this trial, but all the evidence points to the obvious fact. These are not just your average Joes and Janes. These are very, very connected individuals. These are individuals who have their own brand of mafia, the Canton Mafia, and they have proven it time and time and time again that they're willing to lie, they're willing to protect one another, they're willing to lie in order to protect one another, and they will influence others lest they want to be hurt or, God forbid, killed, because there is word on the street that Brian Albert has killed before. This is not his first body. And John O'Keefe, allegedly, the story goes, he was either going to go to the police with this information, meaning like actually rat him out, report him, and so on, and they realized they got to get rid of him. And they thought that they could do it because he's a police officer himself at the time, Brian Albert. He's a very connected individual. And so this idea that this is a cover-up, I mean, with so many people involved, like how could a government if they bring charges, some people believe, well, you must have done something. The government doesn't just willy-nilly bring charges unless your name is Adam Lally and Mr. Morrissey, his boss, and Sarah McLaughlin, his colleague, who works at the Norfolk DA's office, who are all trying to convict an innocent woman because all they're looking at is another peg that they can use to further their career. These people are highly protected, the Alberts and the McCabe's. And Lally was just using that to propel his career forward, and it's disgusting. Let's continue listening to Alan Jackson.
That's how a Massachusetts state trooper says in whispered tones to his friends when he thought no one was looking or listening, how he would make a case, how he would make it cut and dry, no matter the truth, how he would make sure to put, quote, serious charges on the girl. In other words, pin it on the girl. You may ask yourself, how does this happen? How could this happen? It's 2024. Surely people aren't going to come to this courtroom, this hall of justice, and lie to us, just give us false information. They wouldn't do that. They wouldn't try to cover up the truth. The Alberts, the McCabe's, Higgins, Lank, Michael Proctor, Yuri Buchanan, Brian Tully. You don't have to wonder if they would lie to support their narrative. You need only wonder how many times they did lie.
Yep.
Over and over and over. They and others were caught deceiving you. Big things, small things. It didn't really matter. They feared nothing. They'll look you in the eye and deny phone calls. They'll deny secret meetings. They'll claim that calls are butt dials and butt dials are answered. They'll show you a video and tell you left is right and right is left. They'll magically turn 3 pieces of plastic into 5 right before your eyes. And even when they're caught with their own lies, they won't blink, they don't sweat. They'll just look you in the eye and demand, pay no attention. You folks, look the other way. Ladies and gentlemen, there was a cover-up in this case, plain and simple. You'll surely say to yourself, I don't want to believe it. I don't want to believe that can happen in our community. But sadly, over the past 8 weeks, you've seen it right before your eyes. So how does a cover-up happen? How could that happen? Well, let's count the ways, shall we?
This is very, very, very important. In a typical criminal defense case, I can speak to it because I myself am a criminal defense lawyer, for those of you who don't know me. The chances of you having a full-blown cover-up when the fingers are all pointing in one direction and the government is pointing in this direction are so slim to none that Jackson needs to justify. He can't just call it a cover-up. He needs to justify his words, even though he's had weeks of testimony, 8 weeks of trial, 10 weeks total, including jury selection, as you all who have been following this case know. Jury selection started April 16th, and we're at the end of June here. I believe this is June 27th or 28th. The most fascinating thing about this whole ordeal is that you have to show this jury how a cover-up could even occur. He can't just leave it at that. Watch how Jackson does it.
Handpick your investigator. Make sure it's someone we know, someone on our side. Keep him close. Offer him help. Offer him a gift. Have secret friends and family meetings. Get your story straight. Delete your call history. Make mysterious phone calls at 2:22 a.m. Delete Google searches. Monitor police activity. Get rid of evidence. Get rid of your dog. Destroy your phones. Destroy your SIM card. For the investigator, decide on a narrative early on. Don't go to the crime scene. Don't take witnesses in for questioning. Question all the witnesses together. Ignore witnesses who don't fit your narrative. Allow friends and family to contact those same witnesses. Don't record interviews. Write vague and false police reports. Omit witnesses' names. Omit witnesses' interviews altogether. Don't photograph the evidence. Don't conduct any forensics. Don't document the evidence. Don't document the logs. Don't create any logs whatsoever, and don't maintain a chain of custody. Keep all the evidence in the hands of one person, and then manipulate that evidence, including videos. Don't turn over videos. Invert videos. Turn 4:16 p.m. into 5:30 p.m. in affidavits. Turn 3 pieces of taillight into 5 pieces of taillight. Delete 42 minutes of surveillance footage. Hide personal relationships. Make this case cut and dry, and ensure the homeowner, quote, never sees any shit because he's a Boston cop. But most importantly, pick your patsy and pin it on the girl. It's not that it could happen. It's that every single one of those things I just mentioned did happen right in front of you. But this sort of injustice can't happen in a vacuum. So what about the prosecution? What about the Commonwealth? What does it look like when the government picks a narrative and then tries to form a prosecution around the narrative instead of the other way around? Looks a lot like this. If you don't have actual evidence, just throw every single thing you can against the wall to see what sticks. Drag her through the mud and make sure you attack her character. And that's what you saw in this case. The Commonwealth spent much of their time and resources trying to vilify Karen Read. They desperately resorted to calling witnesses to talk about Karen Read and John O'Keefe's arguments. They even stooped so low as to call the children and put them through this ordeal.
That's
All
right.
to say that John sometimes got upset because Karen was too kind, too nice, spoiled them too much. Their arguments illustrated what anybody could imagine is a normal set of ups and downs for any couple. Even on January 28th, they talked it out, they communicated, they worked out their issues, and they had a nice, affectionate evening out with their friends. And you don't have to take my word for it. Pull the tape, as they say. Look at the videos. C.F. McCarthy, Waterfall. What are the words that every single person who testified in this case used about Karen Read and John O'Keefe that night? Getting along, no issues, good mood, happy, affectionate, even lovey-dovey. No issues, no toxicity. They were a loving couple right up until the time Karen Read dropped him off and he walked into 34 Fairview. If an argument with a loved one is a motive for murder...
Notice how he said, up until he walked into 34 Fairview. There is no doubt in his mind, based on all the evidence, that John O'Keefe went inside the house. I think this point could have been hammered just slightly better. Look, far be it for me from criticizing this man. After 10 weeks of trial, I don't know if I would be able to put on half of a performance as this man did. But I think using the text messages where Brian Higgins, Brian Albert, Jennifer McCabe, and I think Matthew McCabe, the four of them, remember the text messages? For those of you who've been watching the trial, there was a moment when Brian Higgins texts someone, I think it was him, saying, tell them to tell the guy never went in the house. Like they manufactured it. It was clear through the text messages. I think that needed to be hammered home just a little bit more. And Jackson didn't do it, and he had a golden opportunity here. And that is a huge piece. That is a huge piece of the cover-up. But it is what it is.
Folks, we're all in trouble. Speaking of which, what is the evidence that John went into the house? The Commonwealth will tell you, undoubtedly, no, he never went in the house. And they'll point to certain witnesses who they say didn't see him go in. Well, the question you have to ask yourself is, can you rely on that? First, these are all people who are related to or committed to the Alberts in some way or another.
Correct.
That all-powerful Canton family, it's easy to say, I didn't see something, because how can that really be challenged? Some actually may not have seen John walk into the house. They were in the kitchen, as you recall, from Nicole. Third, at least one witness, Brian Higgins, forgot his narrative, at least for a second, and he admitted a man did, in fact, come into the house. And then when he was caught and asked to describe that man, he had to. It was a little bit vague. You remember what he said. He was tall, with dark hair. That was a telling slip of the tongue by Brian Higgins. But what's the real evidence of the unbiased data, the data that's not connected to the Albert family? How about John's Apple Health data? It shows that at 12...
And I'm sorry, I said Brian Higgins. I believe it was Matthew McCabe. Matthew McCabe was the one who admitted to the text, not Brian Higgins. I apologize. I may have misspoke.
12:21 a.m., an important time, John arrived. That's established by the monotonic time clock that you heard about in this trial that was on his phone, and that represents a huge problem for the Commonwealth. It shows that he took 80 steps and ascended or descended 3 flights of stairs at that time. And that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? It matches. Walks into the house, goes directly to the basement. There's your 80 steps and your descending flights of stairs. The big problem for the Commonwealth is he wasn't outside at the car ascending and descending stairs, wasn't climbing on top of the car. So they'll tell you, wait, don't look at the Apple Health data, look at this other thing called Waze. But Rick Green explained that if you apply the 3-minute offset that is built into that monotonic time, it aligns perfectly. They don't want you to see that. They don't want you to pay attention. They want you to look the other way.
Look the other way.
But even more importantly, at approximately 12:32 a.m., someone holding John's phone takes another 36 steps and travels 25 meters. Why is that so important? Because by 12:32 a.m., Karen Reed was gone. She had already left the location. She left at 12:30.
And that is huge. That is enormously important. How is it possible that John's phone traveled after Karen Reed is already gone if he was truly hit by a car? Are you going to sit here and argue that he was crawling on the lawn? I don't buy that for a second, especially not that distance.
Trooper Garino told you that Karen Reed's phone connected to John's Wi-Fi at what time?
Right there.
12:36. It is undisputed in this case that it's a 6-minute drive on a good day from 34 Fairview over to One Meadows. She was gone by 12:30, and John's phone was taking 36 steps and logging 25 meters at 12:32 after she'd left. So don't be fooled. John walked into that house, after which Karen drove away, and the scientific data all prove it. But also, Ryan Nagel and Heather Maxson prove it. In addition to the Apple Health data, Ryan and Heather both independently testified that they passed Karen's SUV as they drove away after talking to Julie. And Karen was alone in the SUV. John was not with her. He wasn't in the car. He wasn't standing outside the car. He wasn't sitting beside the car. He wasn't laying on the ground beside the car. He was nowhere in sight. There's only one other place that John could have been, and that's in the house. Exactly where the Apple Health data places him. So it all fits. And Ryan was right behind her, remember, staring at her taillights, undamaged, brightly lit. That brings up another difficulty for the Commonwealth, and that's their star witness, Jennifer McCabe. You'll recall that Jennifer McCabe claimed that she was looking out the door, staring at that SUV over.
And by the way, Jennifer McCabe, you can't see her. She's off camera here. But previously in this video, she's seated right next to Brian Albert. She's in the courtroom, and Colin Albert is seated to her left. So the three of them are in the courtroom. What kind of message do you think that sends to the jury? That the John O'Keefe family, the O'Keefe family of the deceased, has invited the real killers to come sit with them? Oh, come on. That's unfathomable. I would like to know how much smoke the Alberts and the McCabes have been blowing in the O'Keefe family. For how many months? For how many years that Karen Reed is the true responsible culprit, and they believed all of that. I welcome you to look at a clip of John O'Keefe's mother after the judge declares a mistrial. I mean, she was just beside herself. She wanted vindication, she wanted justice, she wanted closure, and she did not get it. She did not get it because the real killers were in the courtroom, especially on the last day of closing arguments and the beginning of deliberations. But it's not Karen. And I'm amazed at the chutzpah that Paul O'Keefe had in telling Karen that we're not done yet with you on his way out of the courtroom as the mistrial was announced. I mean, it's become less of a trial and more of a crap show at this point. I don't get it. There's a lot of things about this case that I just don't understand.
Over and over and over again from 1229 to 1250. She was very specific about that time frame. But we know that the SUV was gone from 34 Fairview by about 1230. Had to be in order to connect to the Wi-Fi at 1236. So unequivocally, Jennifer McCabe was lying about watching that SUV, and it makes you wonder why. And to add to that deceit, she was also blatantly lying about the calls to John's phone. You remember that colloquy back and forth. She said that every single one of those calls to John's phone during that time was a butt dial. How are those lies connected? And why are they connected? Jennifer McCabe knows. Was she butt dialing John over and over? Or was someone looking for John's phone that went missing? Let's talk for a second about what actually happened in the time leading up to everyone going to 34 Fairview. Brian Albert, Brian Higgins show up drunk at the waterfall. They'd been drinking in the afternoon. You know about the flirtatious texts that were sent between Karen Reed and Brian. Higgins was clearly pining over Karen, but for her, the flirtation had ran its course. It was done. She was happy and committed to John. You could see that in her actions with John that night. You don't have to guess. Brian Higgins, however, you can see in his actions, he wasn't quite so satisfied and he wasn't done. His text message, well, meaning, what the hell, Karen? What about me? Seemed aggressive, seemed annoyed. He didn't like being ignored. That was pretty clear. So he's 5 or 6 whiskeys deep into the night by this time, and she continued to ignore him. Then oddly, Higgins, who doesn't know John all that well, seems to want to coax John to 34 Fairview. I draw your attention to the waterfall tape if you want to take another look at it. It's at the 11:57 mark, between 11:57 and 11:58. Take a look at that tape. He's just about to leave. Higgins is just about to leave. He points over at John and he motions for him. Come on, come with me. And then at 12:20, he texts him, you coming here? This is a person he doesn't really know and didn't really talk to that entire night. Ask yourself, why was Higgins so insistent that John go to 34 Fairview that night? And then there's that sparring and fighting that he and Brian Albert were engaged in. Of all the things they could be doing, this is what they were doing just minutes before John O'Keefe walked into that house at 34 Fairview. We know that once John actually did walk in the door, it's about 2 steps, 4 feet or so, 2 steps for an adult male to reach that basement door. Remember, everybody was gathered in the kitchen. That's what Nicole Albert said. And every single witness agreed that at some point, Brian Higgins and Brian Albert left the group and went to another room.
I would really like to hear from one of the jurors who deliberated in the Karen Reed case. I don't know if we're going to get a chance to get interviews. I don't know if I'll be able to get them on my channel. I'd be more than happy if they would reach out. I'm not counting on it. But I'd really like to speak to them and pick their brains and be like, what made you decide in one direction or the other, and what made the other jurors decide in one direction or the other? Don't even tell us the split if you're not comfortable. Like, what were the arguments for conviction? What were the arguments for acquittal? I'm obviously more interested in the arguments for conviction because, as one of the jurors put it, quote, "Despite our commitment in the duty entrusted to us, we find ourselves," and this is the key word, "fundamentally divided in our differences in our opinions and state of mind. The divergence in our views is not rooted in a lack of understanding, meaning of the evidence, or effort, but," here's more key words, "deeply held convictions that each of us carry, ultimately leading to a point where consensus is unattainable. We recognize the weight of this admission and the implication it holds." Now, that's powerful. Think about that. I'd really like to know.
Where did they go? Where did they go together? Another important point. Chloe was not upstairs. Brian Albert slipped in one of his testimony that he provided.
And by the way, again,
Quote,
Brian Albert is seated right there in the courtroom. I love that. He's not afraid at all. He's just going for the jugular, and it's just magnificent.
"I was watching Chloe downstairs, monitoring her because of the other people in the house. She's not good with strangers."
She's not good with
Remember that
strangers.
testimony. So what happened next? We absolutely know that John was in the house. The data, Ryan, Heather, they all established that. We know that John ascended or descended stairs. We know that Brian Higgins and Brian Albert excused themselves. How long does it take to have a crossword? How long does it take to have a fight? How long would it take for Brian Higgins to say to John, "You know, your girl's been texting me"? A push, a punch, a fall, pull Chloe off his arm, and now it's done. What is that? 5 seconds? 10? Doesn't take long at all. And then the panic sets in. It wasn't intended to go that far, but what's done is done. And then some very, very odd things start happening.
And that's very important. That he's not saying they killed him intentionally, because that would be a stretch. We don't know if it was intentional or not. What we do know is that it happened. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, before you know it, the whole thing is done. Oh crap, now what do? We have a man unconscious laying on our basement floor. What do we do now? By the way, a home that was never investigated, a home that was never searched, a home that was never photographed. There was evidence. We could have found evidence. We could have seen evidence of a fight or a scuffle that erupted in that basement, but we'll never know because no evidence has been preserved because the police never checked inside the house. Why? Because they were protecting one of their own, Brian Albert. Oh, he's a first responder. He's a cop. We don't want to give him any crap.
At the Albert household. Very odd indeed. What do we know? We know through the testimony and key swipes that Brian Higgins very oddly goes directly to Canton Police Department. Why would he do that? After a night of drinking and partying, why go to CPD when you're drunk? What was so important there? He couldn't even get his own story straight. First he said it was administrative work, then he said he was moving cars, then he said it was a factor of both. Is it both? Was it neither? Or was he there to gather intel? Ask yourself, why go? But the odd things keep piling up, and here's another. Chloe was the Albert family pet. Not only did she appear to be gone from the house that morning on January 29th, nobody saw her there. Even Jen McCabe admitted, "Yeah, I didn't see her there." But they actually got rid of the dog altogether. Within months of this incident, the dog was gone, out of the house, rehomed, never to be seen again. This was a dog they had had for 7 years. Also a dog who had a bite history. Why was it so important to get rid of that dog? Was there something about the dog they did not want law enforcement to find out? Recall what Dr. Russell said. She's seen up to 1,000 animal attacks. In her expert opinion, John's right arm, those injuries are from an animal, quote, most likely a large dog. And Dr. Russell's testimony, I'll remind you, was undisputed by any witness for the Commonwealth. But there are more odd and unexplained things. After a night of drinking and hanging out and partying, after being together for the entire day, at 2:22 a.m., Brian Albert decides to call Brian Higgins. That call was missed, but 17 seconds later, Higgins calls Brian back, and they speak for 22 seconds. Now, that call is odd and suspicious enough, in just in and of itself, the fact that the call was made. But what's even more incriminating is that both men, both of them, lied about the calls happening. They both claim astonishingly that those calls are, you probably say it with me, they're butt dials. Amazing. But Albert and Higgins take it a step further. Not only did they claim that they were making calls as butt dials, but they were answering calls as butt dials. And Higgins seemed awfully defensive about that call, didn't he? Remember on cross-examination when I was asking him, can you have a conversation in 22 seconds? He unequivocally said, no, that's impossible. It's not reasonable. You can't do it. Well, let's test that out.
Boom, watch this.
Hey, did you make it over to Canton? Yep. Haven't been any calls. Nobody knows a thing. All right, don't talk to anybody until we talk again. Okay, fine. And by the way, come back over. I need help moving something heavy. How long did that take? 15 seconds? Maybe? But the odd behavior isn't done yet. 5 minutes after that call that we just talked about, Jennifer McCabe is on her phone at her house, Google searching how long it takes for someone to die in the cold. That was at 2:27 a.m. That timeline seems to fit, doesn't it? And it fits a very telling and a very clear story. That search became a focal point of the Commonwealth's entire case. This case was starting to look a lot more like the defense of Jennifer McCabe than anything else.
Yeah.
And that's probably because there is no innocent explanation for that Google search at 2:27 a.m. None. At the end of the day, clearing away all the confusion, the Commonwealth's experts were left with two things that are true. First, neither of their experts could absolutely rule out that Jennifer McCabe made that search at 2:27 a.m. Neither. And second, the only person to use the actual phone model, the actual data, and the actual precise operating system was Rick Green. And he was clear. That search was at or before 2:27 a.m. And then it was deleted. So what else was going on at or around this same time when all this suspicious activity was happening at the Albert house and the McCabe house? 3 minutes after that search and 8 minutes after the Albert Higgins 2:22 a.m. call, Brian Loughran drives down the street in his snowplow. And he told you that there is no body laying on the lawn at 34 Fairview at 2:30 in the morning.
Exactly.
Importantly, he didn't just simply say he didn't see a body, he wasn't paying attention. He said there was no body there. He knows the property, he knows the owners, he's grown up with these folks, he passes by all the time, not once, not twice, 3 passes. There was no body on that lawn.
That's huge.
Period. At 2:30 a.m. And what other suspicious thing happened that night? By 3:30 a.m., someone moved a Ford Edge in front of the very area that would obstruct the view of where John's body would ultimately be discovered. Who's the only person in this case that you've heard about with a Ford Edge?
He was blocking it.
Brian Albert. Remember, as you're thinking about this, the basement at 34 Fairview is serviced by a bulkhead. It's a quick and convenient door to the backyard. And that backyard is serviced by a side fence. And that side fence is easily accessible to the front yard at the side of the house. Which side of the house? The side where John's body was found. And by 6 a.m., John's body was, in fact, now outside. While this flurry of suspicious activity was going on with the Alberts and the McCabes, what's happening with Karen? All she knows at this point, think about it, at approximately 2:21, she dropped off John, he walked into 34 Fairview, and that's all she knows. She knows nothing else.
So Karen leaving those angry voicemails are actually, in my humble opinion, on her side for an acquittal of murder. Because if in some parallel universe where Karen Reed did hit John O'Keefe with her car, why on earth and how on earth could you go back and fabricate fake emotion being angry at a person who's deceased? Has anybody thought about this? Of course, the defense doesn't get a chance to respond. They do their closing, then the government does their closing, and that's the end of it. But think about it. Why would someone who is, let's say, knows that they left someone to die in the cold is going to be leaving angry voicemails about how they're abandoning their kids, how much of a bad parent they are, how they're prioritizing partying over making sure that their children are in bed and they're going to have warm breakfast in the morning? It just doesn't make any sense. Jennifer McCabe texting John's phone saying, "Are you here? Like, where are you?" or whatever, is a lot more akin to someone who's plotting, because it's just dry words on a page, on a phone. Whereas Karen's emotion of this hate towards John for him abandoning his children is so much more akin to someone who's innocent, because she still believed he was alive. Little does she know, he was killed in the 34 Fairview's basement after a fight, and he was dying in the cold. As Jennifer McCabe was Googling Huss Long to die in the cold. And then the next morning, Jennifer McCabe is calm, cool, and collected, and Karen Reed is freaking out. Jennifer McCabe knows what has happened. She is calm as a cucumber. "Oh, we have a dead or dying man on our lawn. Wonder how that happened." Whereas Karen is frazzled. She's like screaming. She's running around like a chicken with its head cut off. Is he dead? Is he dead? Is he dying? Because she had no idea what had happened. That John was killed by the mafia, by the Canton mafia. It's the only logical conclusion that can be drawn.
That was going on. So what was she left to think? He goes in to check the party out, but all of a sudden he's not coming back. He's not responding. Minutes start to pass. 1 minute turns to 2, 2 turn to 10. Where is he? Why isn't he responding? She's sitting in the cold, dark, freezing outside in the car. Naturally, she's perturbed. Being perturbed turns into being peeved. And being peeved eventually turns into being pissed. By 12:30, Karen's mad. She's left 34 Fairview to make a point, but she's still texting and calling. What could she reasonably be thinking at this point? What's going through her mind? 12:33 turns into 12:34. I can't believe he'd do this to me. 12:34 turns into 12:35. Where is he? Why aren't you answering, John? 12:35 turns to 12:36. Jesus Christ. I'm calling and you're not answering. Where are you? Pick up the phone. But there's still no answer. There's still no response. By 12:37, she's getting furious. She does not know that something has happened to John. She does not know that. So she leaves the first angry voicemail. Illustrates frustration, aggravation, all the normal responses anybody might have, you and I might have. But little did she know. The next open voicemail has Karen parking at John's garage after she gets home. You can hear her heels clicking across the garage floor. For all she knows at this point, John's just drunk, he's been partying, he's hanging out, just forgot about her, blowing her off. But John's still not responding, and as the minutes tick by, Karen becomes increasingly upset. Those are the voicemails that you heard. How could he do this? Why is he ignoring me? Why is he ignoring the kids? Those are the thoughts bearing down on Karen Reed as she sat in an empty house late at night by herself. Ladies and gentlemen, she did not know what had happened to John. But within the next voicemail, you quickly learn what she was thinking and what she was feeling. Now it's 5:23 a.m. She's woken up, she's realized that he hasn't come home and he hasn't responded to a single text, not a single call. And anger quickly turns to panic and abject fear.
And by the way, look at Karen's face. You can see genuine concern. Jackson is taking her back to that day mentally. She's back in that day realizing that John O'Keefe is missing. That, folks, right there is genuine emotion. I'm really glad that the camera panned to her face. I mean, this is like the perfect timing. This is A++ camera work. So thank you, cameraman.
She's so distraught, she reaches out to him again. John, where the fuck are you? She says through tears and desperation. And at 6:03, the question was answered, and her worst fears were realized when she finds his body laying, dying in the cold, in Brian Albert's front yard. You heard her. You can feel the grief. You can feel the raw anguish. You could see it. You don't have to wonder the emotional journey that Karen traveled that night. You can see it in the video. You can hear it in the audio. From the time he left her and walked into 34 Fairview and she called, she reached out 53 times. She called him 53 times before finding his body. Think about that. The Commonwealth wants you to believe that she murdered this man. And then after that murder, she called him not once, not twice, 53 times. It makes no sense.
None.
What does make sense is that she emotionally moved from anger, then to panic, then to grief. So back at 5:07, when she began her search looking for John, she backed out of the garage, and what would happen next would change the entire course of this case. As she backed out of that garage, she hit John's Traverse and cracked her right rear taillight.
Yeah.
Folks, the Commonwealth has one job to do in this courtroom. It's an immutable responsibility to provide you with the truth. That's it. Not to win the case, but to seek justice and to do it through the truth. Ask yourself, did you get that truth from the Commonwealth? The Commonwealth continually tried to tell you that that video showed that the SUV came close to John's Traverse, and it took us showing you the video to unequivocally establish that Karen hit that car and cracked her taillight at 5:07. You can almost hear an audible gasp in the courtroom when we finally showed you the actual video. We can see that tire move. I'm only going to show you one series of exhibits during my entire closing, but it's that important. And it's this. Look at the condition of her taillight when she pulls out of the driveway at 5:07.
This is
that
huge.
Taillight.
That right there by itself should exonerate Karen Reed. Right there. This is 5 o'clock in the morning on January 29th. Her taillight is intact. It was broken later. This is insanity as to how the jury didn't acquit. That's why he showed it, because he knows this is the most valuable, most important piece of evidence, is to show Karen Reed's SUV, Lexus SUV, at 5 a.m., allegedly 5 hours after striking John. You can see the red and the white, they're all there. It was broken later by Proctor and scattered across the body. Taillights don't break. You know, do you understand the level of impact that the plastic, they don't just snap. You have to hit something very, very, very hard in order for that plastic to break. A human body, let alone a human arm, that would have been torn off from the torso at such speeds, is completely unfathomable that Karen Reed struck John O'Keefe with her vehicle. It's just not possible.
Choose my words very carefully here. That taillight is cracked, but it's not completely damaged. And if there was any question in your mind about the level of damage to that taillight at 5:07, all doubt was extinguished when Dighton Police Officer Barros walked into this courtroom. He's a sworn officer. He's not associated with Kenton. He's not associated with the Alberts. He's not associated with the McCabe's. He doesn't know Michael Proctor. In other words, he doesn't answer to any of these folks.
The one outsider.
He's an outsider, and he's completely independent. And his words were the following, quote, "That taillight was not completely damaged. It was cracked. A piece was missing, but not completely damaged." Take a look at this photograph and tell me, which one looks like Officer Barros's description? The one on the left or the one on the right? The reconstructed light on the left is what that light looked like before it was in Trooper Proctor's possession.
It even looks like pieces have been torn out of it and it's been broken by a human. Like the missing piece right here, like that looks like it's been broken by manually using either tools or hands.
Remember that. That's what it looked like before Trooper Proctor had access to the SUV.
Exactly. And remember also how many minutes were missing from that Sallyport video, the inverted, by the way. Folks, thank you all for joining me. I hope you all enjoyed this first part of a two-part series on Alan Jackson's closing in the Karen Reed case. And I will see you all tomorrow for part 2. Bye, everybody.